Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the live Q&A session with Scott Guthrie. My name is Labrina Loving. I'm a senior software engineer here at Microsoft, and I'm super excited to be here because I get to ask Scott all the amazing questions that you guys sent in over the last week. Hey, Scott, good morning.
Morning. Thanks everyone for watching.
Great, great. So we've got a really jam-packed session today, but before we get started, I want to kind of share how this is going to work. So over the past week, we received over 200 questions that spanned across products and roadmap to even trying to get a couple of tidbits of advice from you. So we wanted to make sure that we asked questions that really represented our developer community. We went through every single question, we categorized them, and we are going to break up the session into two core segments. So first, we're going to start with more product-focused questions. We're going to talk about Azure, data and AI, and .NET. Then in the second segment, we're going to start talking a little bit more about the future of Microsoft. And actually, we've got some really good suggestions from our developer community that I'd love to share with you. In between the segments, we're actually going to have a little bit of fun with you. So we're going to actually do a rapid fire set of questions where we'll ask you some really deep, dark, personal questions about you. How does that sound, Scott?
Sounds good.
All right, there's no turning back now. So let's get started. So the first couple of questions we're going to talk about are Azure. So first question is from Randy Walker, and he wants to know, where do you think the growth is headed for the next few years in Azure?
Well, I think it's going to be an exciting next few years for Azure. I mean, I think, as we talked about at the event, everything in the world is going digital. And so, everything's going to have an IP address, everything's going to be connected. And there's, a huge need for, how do you build applications that take advantage of that fact. And a cloud infrastructure is really the best way to do it. And so, I think you're going to see with Azure a tremendous amount of growth, both in terms of new apps, new ways to use data and AI, new ways to run code, not just in Azure, but also connected to edge-based IoT systems and, other systems that run at what we call the edge. I think there's also going to be a lot of growth in terms of a need for how do we as developers architect those systems, and how do we work in teams to actually rapidly deploy them and do it in a reliable, continuous way. And hopefully if you saw my keynote, I try to hit on a lot of those different aspects. And throughout this conference, we're covering each of them. But I think it's going to be an exciting next couple of years. And I think the cloud is really going to be the next big enabler for the world, both in these sort of unusual times with COVID that we're living in, but beyond. I think it's just going to accelerate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to see where we're going to go and all the amazing work that I get to do over the next couple of years in Azure. So great. Thanks for that. So our next question comes from Michael O'Flaherty. What does the quantum computing roadmap on Azure look like over the next 10 years?
Well, I think in terms of things that are coming that are potentially game-changing, I think quantum is in that category. The challenge with quantum is it's still an emerging technology. And I think we're all trying to chase qubits and also figure out how do we build applications that can take advantage of some of the properties of quantum and some of the unique problems that quantum can solve. At Microsoft, we have a quantum team that's part of my organization that's hard at work at that. And as part of that, we're looking hard at both how do we provide quantum services through Azure, and we even announced some previews of some capabilities, I believe, this week along those lines. But we're also looking at, similar to how we've done it with other parts of Azure, looking at our development tools and our development languages. so that we can enable quantum-based algorithms to be more rapidly developed. It's not just enough to have infrastructure. You really want to make it easy to write apps for that infrastructure.
Right.
And there's some great work that you can check out now that's available in preview form, and you'll see us provide all of this as a service going forward, all through Azure.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about getting to work on the quantum developer kit that's coming out or that's available now that our developer community can take advantage of. Great. So next question. With the spike in demand for Azure products and services, what is Microsoft doing to ensure that energy consumption is more efficient? This comes from Shahed.
Great question, Chad. I think one of the things that you may hopefully saw, and I talked about briefly at the start of my keynote, is a set of promises and commitments that Microsoft made back in January around climate change. And specifically, there's a couple of things that we talked about, and a commitment in particular to be 100% renewable energy and be carbon negative by 2030. And we're actually quite a bit away, or quite a bit along that journey already. But we're basically saying by 2030 we will be carbon negative, meaning we're actually removing more carbon from the atmosphere than we're actually emitting into it. And then we also made a promise, which is by 2050 we will have removed all of the emissions that Microsoft has done since the founding of the company in 1975, and that includes travel, that includes our offices, but the big part of our energy consumption as a company is obviously our cloud, and so that involves a ton of work around our cloud, and as part of that, we are going to 100% renewable energy across all of our cloud operations, and we're now providing dashboards that you can look at, which actually even allows you to track your carbon usage inside Azure. And be able to understand even how does it compare versus, say, an on-premises data center. And you can understand how by moving to the cloud, it actually lowers both the carbon footprint as well as the overall energy costs for the planet. So that's definitely something that we're very committed to. I think of all the cloud providers, we have the most comprehensive program there and the most bold ambitions and commitments that we've made publicly in terms of getting to not just lower energy usage, but also really getting to net negative carbon emissions, which is what we need to do as a society in order to prevent global warming.
Okay, that's amazing. I'm really looking forward to checking out the dashboards and helping my customers understand kind of how they're impacting versus on-prem versus on Azure. So that's really exciting. So our next question comes from Lee. And the question is, what is the easiest way to move from Visual Studio Team Services on-prem to Azure DevOps?
Good question. The easiest way, it's a good question. If you go to our Visual Studio Teams, or if you go to our Azure DevOps documentation, I believe we actually have some good guides in terms of how to move. That you should check out first if you haven't looked already. And as part of that, we do have some migration tools specifically that enable some automatic migration of your services and things like your, obviously your source control, but also things like your issues and, how do you not lose your issue tracking numbers and IDs as you kind of migrate to the cloud. So definitely recommend checking out there. And if you still have problems, shoot us mail, and happy to help get the team involved to help. But in general, we're trying to make that as smooth a migration as possible. And I think we have some good tools to help, but let us know if you still have questions and we can follow up afterwards.
Yeah, no, we definitely have some amazing tools out on our website that help you walk through kind of a checklist of how do you migrate to Azure DevOps, if you have customizations, what things you should think about. So yeah, Scott, great answer. So our next few questions are going to be around .NET, and this comes from Eric. So I often get asked, why Microsoft .NET over XYZ language or framework? So my answers are usually half-baked, biased, and uninformed. So Scott, if someone were to ask you, why they should consider .NET or some other language in the Microsoft stack, how would you respond?
Yeah, well, obviously I love .NET, so I wouldn't necessarily claim I'm not biased. I think, the things that, it's amazing when you think about .NET. We first introduced .NET to the world in July of 2000. So, we're about to come up to the 20th anniversary of having .NET out there at a Microsoft developer event, which is kind of an amazing milestone. There's not many technologies and developer frameworks and languages in the world that have lasted that long. I think part of the reason why .NET has not only lasted, but is in some ways even stronger, I think, today than it's been in the past, has been a couple of things that I think are fairly enduring. One has been around C# and just the fact that C# is a great language to program in. I think it provides a nice balance of lots of great high-level productivity capabilities. And so it's a very elegant language from a terseness and productivity perspective, but at the same time is also type safe and generates very efficient code and allows you to kind of drop down if you want to and write very efficient algorithms as well. And I think that's true both from a language perspective, but then also when you look at the .NET libraries and then even the way our garbage collector and our code generator works. I think we've done a nice balance of productivity, library reuse, and then also the ability to get good performance. And I think if you look at .NET Core, which is obviously the last couple of years we've been talking about, that takes it to the next level. And we've had a lot of internal systems at Microsoft that are written in C# that as they have migrated to .NET Core, in some cases have gotten, a 2x performance improvement and are seeing, significant reductions in working set and memory usage and just better performance and latency all up. And, I love that after 20 years, we're still making improvements on performance, while at the same time still shipping new capabilities and productivity. And I think then that as a platform is super powerful, but then the ability to use Visual Studio, which with IntelliSense and with debugging and with our IDE gives you, I think, the most productive development experience out there, bar none. I think that combination of all that is what makes, I think, .NET pretty special. And I think it's got a great future ahead of it. And I love that we have more people graduating from college starting with .NET today than we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so I think also there's a new generation of developers that are coming to .NET. And now that .NET is open source and now that .NET is cross-platform, it's great to see the energy and the community really embracing it at an even greater level than it has been an awfully long time.
Yeah, that's amazing, Scott. So actually, we've got sort of a really good follow-up question to that. What is the future like for .NET? I kind of, and this is from Leslie, I'm kind of new to ASP.NET especially, and want to know what are the growth opportunities with this tech?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things that there's opportunities. I think one of the things that we've tried to do, Leslie, over the last couple of years that I feel good about is really make sure .NET works everywhere. And so the fact that you can use .NET on Windows and Mac and Linux, I think is key. The ability to use .NET not just in the cloud, but also for client applications as well as in IoT devices is key. And then, at the Build conference this week, we also released Blazor, which even allows you to take .NET and compile it down into JavaScript and run it inside a browser and use it with other JavaScript libraries. And so that combination of being able to use it everywhere, I think, gives maximum flexibility. And the fact that it's open source and we have, literally hundreds of thousands of contributions coming from the community, in addition to hundreds of Microsoft engineers working on it, I think is going to just keep driving the energy and the application of it for lots of things. I think one thing that we will see a lot more of with .NET over the next year that I'm very excited about is also it being used as an API layer and being able to publish APIs in a very easy way and consume APIs in an easy way. And we showed this a little bit in the second demo in my talk yesterday, where Jeff Holland did a great demo where he used ASP.NET Web API project to expose to REST API on top of a Cosmos DB database. And then he published it in a Kubernetes cluster. And then he called it from a Power App and then embedded it inside of Teams. And I think that pattern is also going to be something where there's a whole bunch of great .NET apps that'll be built that way, where it might be a different front end. It might be with Power Apps, which is more of a metadata-driven tool, or it might be a website built with ASP.NET, or it might be a rich client app or an IoT device. But then using ASP.NET and our Web API support on the back end to publish that API and integrate it, I think that's something we started showing at Build even more in my keynote, as I mentioned, but you'll see even better tooling and better end-to-end support across our products in the months ahead. In particular, I think for internal employee-facing apps, being able to publish those applications as part of Teams, given that Teams is now used so heavily inside organizations, I think will also be another unique form factor that'll become more and more popular for .NET and ASP.NET apps in the coming year.
Okay, great. That's awesome. I'm so excited about the growth and expansion of .NET and being able to use it on Linux. Like, I can't imagine, like every single day when I tell people .NET runs on Linux, like I have to pick up their mouth from the floor. So super excited to hear all of that. So lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about some AI-oriented questions. Could you elaborate a little bit about how the increased services provided by Microsoft, things like cognitive services, Azure Search, Synapse, provide a case for build and the build versus buy decisions? And this question comes from Mangus.
Yeah, in terms of Synapse and AI, and you're saying build versus buy. Can you repeat that last part again? Sorry, just want to make sure I get the question right.
Yeah, so could you elaborate a bit on how these increased services provide a stronger case for build and build versus buy decisions? So a lot of organizations are obviously being challenged around build versus buy. So it seems like we definitely, with all of our tools, we're looking at more build. So how does that help that decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. The way I think about it is, and the approach we've tried to take is not have it be build or buy, but, or, not have it be like pre-built app or you build it from scratch, but really kind of how do we have this continuum? And I do think part of the power that we have with the Microsoft Cloud is the fact that we do have pre-built apps, things like Teams or things like Office 365 more broadly, but also things like Power BI and Power Apps and Power Automate and Dynamics 365 in particular with sales and customer support and field service. We have a bunch of these apps that do give you out-of-the-box functionality that you can use to stand up very quickly and that have AI algorithms and data models already pre-built that you can leverage. But then what is great is the fact that you can take those applications and extend them with Azure and use Synapse and use our custom AI platform to build your own models or extend our data models with your own entities or your own columns and plug in your own custom AI algorithms into that mix and then basically publish them into the apps and have the apps light up and get smarter. And there's not really many platforms. There's no other vendor out there that does that to the degree that we do. And I think that's a key differentiator. And that's partly why even in my keynote I showed Power Apps and I showed Power BI in a bunch of the scenarios. Is not because I think that replaces custom dev, but I think it means for everyone that is doing custom dev, if you can actually do custom dev together with that, you actually deliver far more than what just a pure buy solution would look like, but you also deliver it in a way that custom dev is as productive or even more productive than just buying something off the shelf as well. And so I think it's really an and we're trying to design our products specifically so that you can leverage custom dev, leverage pre-built apps, and do it in a no cliffs kind of way. And I think that is going to be the real power that will help you drive a whole bunch of projects going forward and really deliver fantastic value to the companies that you work for.
Yeah, I love it. I love the best part of my job is when I'm able to bring kind of business analysts from an organization and their developers together in a room, and we actually get to build something cool. So love it. So last question in this section. What do you think is holding us back in terms of developing the next level of intelligence? Is it the limitations of deep learning algorithms and software, or is it the physical limitations of hardware computers? And that comes from Sined. And also there's kind of a follow-up of where do you see AI by the end of this decade?
Good question. I think in terms of what's holding back AI, I mean, I think there's different ways to answer that. I think and I think Kevin Scott in his talk here at Build will go into more detail. But if you look at the more compute you throw at AI, and part of the reason why, for example, we're building our AI supercomputer as part of Azure, is we definitely see there's a set of algorithms that as you throw more compute at it, and you do that compute not just in terms of CPU, but also in particular the network interchange. And the bandwidth between those CPUs is just as critical, because otherwise then the network becomes the bandwidth, the limiter. But you see smarter algorithms getting built. And I think Kevin Scott will cover it very well in his talk here at Build about some of the amazing types of problems that we're able to solve now that even 2 or 3 years ago looked like science fiction, but they're now here in terms of text understanding, machine understanding, and I think his talk is happening this morning, or maybe it just happened. But so I don't want to steal all his thunder. But there's some really cool demos and some that we'll talk to. So I do think there is something there in terms of more compute, and in particular more network and faster network being a limiter of just the algorithms. But we're solving that. And over the next couple of years, as we continue to kind of improve the computational and the network speeds, the algorithms get smarter. I think, though, there's also a problem, though, which is that we're trying to solve, which is really around data models. AI algorithms, smart AI algorithms can only be really built when you have good data. And if you have bad data, then you can build really bad AI algorithms. And so that's a really important thing for people to understand as you're building your own AI algorithms is if you put garbage in, you will get garbage out from your AI. Absolutely. And, there's a whole bunch of problems around bias, around unintended consequences around AI, and around just incorrect answers that you can do if you don't look at your data inputs well and make sure that you have the right data. And part of the responsible AI work that we announced in my keynote yesterday, and we're talking a lot more about at Build, is actually how do we provide the tools to the data scientists that are building AI algorithms to really understand why did the model make this prediction, and be able to work back from that. And so that's a key part of I think that is holding back the industry, because if you work for a financial company or an insurance company and you need to be able to explain why did we approve this loan or why did we approve this financial transaction versus not, that's something you legally have to do to a regulator or to someone who says you should have approved this and you didn't. If you can't explain it, then you can't use AI in that scenario. And so, I think the tools that we're coming out with this week help with that, and also help us do much more responsible AI for even non-regulated scenarios to make sure people understand why the algorithm is saying what it's doing. I think then the last thing that we're doing that is also really critical is how do we enable you to use a lot of the data models you already have and connect them to AI training? And, I mentioned earlier about things like pre-built apps like Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform and Office 365. And one of the things we've done at Microsoft that it's definitely, if you're not familiar with, it's worth getting more educated about, is to find really this common data model that all of our services inside Microsoft are contributing to. And you can put all that data in a Azure Synapse data lake. And that means that a contact in Office is the same contact that might be in your CRM application with Dynamics 365. And what's nice is it's extensible, and you can then build Power BI apps, you can build Power Apps against it, and you can build .NET apps against it. And that ability to start with a pre-built data model that all your applications are already populating data into is very powerful for building apps, but it's even more powerful for building AI. Because you can now do analytics and you can train models on a schema that is well understood and that is already populated with data that that's running your enterprise. And that will also help you quite a bit in terms of building smarter AI algorithms and be able to kind of apply them into use in a much better way. And so I think that's also going to be key. And that's a place, again, where I think the Microsoft Cloud is going to be very differentiated and very unique in terms of enabling you to do that fast and have kind of an end-to-end both tooling but also trust boundary that you can run it in.
Yeah, super exciting. Thank you for that, Scott. So you've been doing pretty good on the hot seat, but now it's about to get even hotter. So okay. We're getting ready for our rapid fire. So we got 2 minutes on the clock, and we're going to ask you some really personal questions. So first one, if you weren't working at Microsoft, where would you be working? And I see you're kind of in a law library, so I'm going to guess lawyer.
No, I love lawyers, but I definitely don't want to be one. No, this is my office at home. These are actually stamp albums, believe it or not. I don't work in a law library, and I don't think I have any law books in my house. But stamp collecting is a hobby of mine that I do. So these are actually stamp albums. But if I wasn't working at Microsoft and I wasn't in technology, I think I'd want to be a history professor. I'm a big history buff, so I also like to read and study history. That's probably why I like stamps. So so I think I'd be a history professor.
Okay, very, very cool. All right. So this question comes from Kai, and it's pretty near and dear to my heart because I volunteer with a lot of STEM organizations like Black Girls Code. And one of the things that the girls always tell me is that they want your job. So what's the one word, what's the one word of advice that you would give for those that are in high school or middle school trying to get interested in tech?
Good. Well, one word's hard. I think the thing I would say for both,
it could be more than one word.
Okay. I think both people looking to get into tech, but then also people that are in tech. I think maybe there's maybe 2 or 3 bits of advice I'd give. I think one is try to find the joy in it. I think all of our jobs involve work. That's why it's called work. But if you can find your passion in tech and find whether it's a side project or just something that brings you joy, it could be building a web app or an app to help a community or as part of a nonprofit. But I think just the more you can find the joy and the fun of learning and applying some of the tech skills, I think that's a great motivator to kind of keep doing more. And then related to that, I would say keep learning. I mean, I think one thing about tech that is great about it, but it's also something you just got to go in and recognize is that it's constantly changing. And so I love it because everything in 5 years is old. And there's always new ways and new approaches and new technologies and new scenarios. And it's important just to recognize that because otherwise you can feel overwhelmed by it, but you can also, if you can think about it positively, it's something that's going to keep you challenged and it's going to keep you on on your toes, which I think can be a fun thing if you think about it that way. And then I just say keep learning, and the more you can do things, and the more you can learn, I think the more successful you'll be in this industry. And again, the good news is there's more and more scenarios that are going digital and going tech. And so I think it is a great career and it is a great industry to be in.
Awesome.
And
Okay,
don't
so
give
one
up.
last yes, absolutely, don't give up. One last rapid fire question. So if Microsoft would re-release one kind of technology from the past, what technology would you want that to be?
Ooh, one technology. We could re-release anything. So that's a tough one. From the past, meaning from Microsoft's past, or
Yeah, or any past.
yeah, it's the funny thing is I think with some of the things that we've done recently, with .NET Core and with VS Code and with GitHub, and with Azure in some ways, but especially I think .NET Core, it's nice because we sort of re-released it in some way, something that was incredibly popular, but we did, we made it open source, we made it multi-platform, we made it really lean and efficient, and cleaned it up even more. And so it's in some ways I'd say that's the one that I would have done, and I'm really glad that we did it. So I guess that'd probably be the one that I celebrate the most.
Okay, that's fair enough. But the right answer was Zune. So, sorry. All right, awesome. So now we're going to move on to our next segment around more future type questions. So, first one comes from Rohan. It asks, it's fair to say working from home will be more common in the future, but collaborating in person at work is different from doing so remotely, at least for now. Like Satya pointed out recently, being able to connect with the team in person is an important part of working from office. So what's your vision of how developers will collaborate remotely, but with the same effect as working in person? So doing things like pair programming, code reviews, new hires. How do you envision that working in the future?
Yeah, it is different. And I do think, I think it's important when we think about what that difference will look like. There's both kind of how do we make developers more productive in a remote environment, and that I feel very good about. Specifically with the work we're doing with GitHub, with the work we're doing with VS, and things like live share inside VS, and then things like code spaces, which we talked a lot about both at this event at the GitHub Satellite event 2 weeks ago. And in some ways, I think, especially the last 2 months, we've done some really good work to kind of bring together both GitHub and our Visual Studio family of tools and Azure, in a nice way that you can be incredibly productive standing up an environment of a dev environment. You can do check-ins. You can use that to coordinate your deployment into your cloud. You can do pair programming with live share, and all of that is integrated now and built in some ways inside GitHub, and inside VS and inside Azure. And throughout a lot of the demos and the events here, you can kind of see that reflected. I think that is going to enable much greater productivity for developers, and enable also the ability to stand it up in a small team environment, so that you don't need to have like 100 people work to set that up. Our vision is really, you go to GitHub, you sign up. We made GitHub for Teams free, and you can now invite anyone into your team, and you can now have that workflow set up and just have it work with a click of a button. Whether it's your CI/CD, whether it's your code spaces, and your live share and your tools integration. So I think that's good. I think the thing, though, I would say is on a productivity side, I feel great about that. I think the other thing that we're trying to do, and I think the next couple of months, as we're all living with COVID and some real restrictions on travel and being in person, is how do we not just make developers more productive, meaning they can get more done, but also how do we make our lives fun again? And how do we actually don't lose that human element, which isn't just about getting code written faster, but it's also about, the social connection that we all as human beings like and want. And that is also, again, something that I feel like we're doing some good work on with GitHub and our VS family of tools in particular. Even subtle things like, adopting a pull request model, and the fact that you can add, things like, emojis and, GIFs into the pull request, I think is important in terms of, you can do it for silly reasons. But that silly is kind of, I think, still important. It's part of human life. And so we are trying to have these tools not just feel like they are, have all the enterprise capabilities that people need, but also they do have that human element, and they're fun to use. And I do like the fact that both with GitHub in particular, the starting with the GitHub logo, and even just if you look at the style, we are trying to make it fun. In addition to actually making you very productive and being enterprise grade. And I think the same is true for VS. And, even some of the touches we've added with live share and some of the other tooling work we're doing, we're trying to make it fun and make it human. And, part of what I even love about Build this week is, I'm in my study at home, and you're seeing all of our inside our houses. And, even my infamous slippers and pajama bottoms yesterday in my talk, if you saw at the end, we're all humans, and let's celebrate that we're human, and let's, we're all going through this together, and let's try to make it fun and make sure that we build that human element into the products we deliver is something that I'm very focused on too.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for that, Scott. So, this next question is for my fellow database developers. So it comes from Scott Glass. He asks, will SSIS and database projects get more attention in the near future? They're great feature sets that provide excellent value to the enterprise, but it seems to get left behind at times. Build support, testing, automated deployments, and code reviews.
It's a good question, Phil. I think on the SSIS front, there is work that we're doing. Things like our, for example, SQL database managed instance support inside Azure does support now SSIS projects. I know that was a common ask that we didn't do in the past with our SQL database service. So we are trying to build that in. SSIS does have some requirements that haven't always historically mapped as well in a cloud-based environment, but we definitely recognize there's a huge population of people using SSIS, and so having it be built in and having it be better supported is definitely something the team's focused on. We're also trying to make sure that with things like our data factory support that we've built in natively into Azure Synapse, as well as some of the connector work that we've done with Power BI in particular, we are also trying to make sure that we both integrate with SSIS, but that we also do build in more data movement and more data transformation and manipulation capabilities into the products themselves as well, and also adapt to support not just relational but actually non-relational scenarios. And so you're going to see us continue to invest along those lines as well. And I think, I've met with the team recently to look at some of that work. And, I think you'll see some good stuff in the year ahead along those lines.
Okay, awesome. So I think we got time for a couple more questions and before our last rapid fire. So the next question comes from Topper. Is the mixed / augmented reality market stalled, do you feel? Where do you see opportunities for mixed and augmented reality in the next few years?
I don't think the mixed or augmented reality market stalled at all, actually. We're seeing more demand than ever, frankly. And our biggest struggle right now is how do we make as many HoloLenses as possible, as fast as possible. I think we're literally trying to ramp up production as fast as possible because the demand has been so high. And I think the reason it's, the demand's been high is both the technology is getting a lot better. And if you look at HoloLens 2, for example, the field of view is much broader and wider. when you are able to put one on your head, it's so much more comfortable than HoloLens 1. And even touches like being able to flip up the lens and flip it down makes it very, very useful for a lot of professional scenarios where you occasionally want to use the augmented reality, but you don't necessarily want to always use it. And so this gives you a nice way you can flip it up to get it out of your field of view, which again makes it great for a bunch of use cases. So in general, I'd say I think it's we're seeing great demand there. And I think in this day of COVID, as an example in particular, we are seeing a bunch of use cases where people just can't physically get together or need to be able to provide assistance remotely. And HoloLens has been really an amazing solution to enable that. I'll give you a couple examples. I mentioned one with like Sheba Medical Center in my keynote yesterday, where they need to be able to bring in people from elsewhere around the world that would usually fly to their facility and do in-person training. Now they can instead FedEx HoloLens and do it remotely. We've run into, even as we're standing up new infrastructure inside Azure, as some countries have closed their border and not allowed non-citizens in. Sometimes we have trained people that only know how to install certain pieces of equipment, and what we found is we can actually instead just ship HoloLenses, and then these trained people can work remotely and guide the people on the ground to actually do their task. And what we're finding is not only does it solve the problems that we have temporarily because of COVID, but it's caused us to realize, well, why don't we always do that going forward? Because we can be so much more productive, and that's going to allow us to stand up infrastructure even faster. And so, I do think lots of organizations are kind of doing and going through that realization. And so I think you'll see even more usages in the months and years ahead. I also think going back to kind of some of the comments earlier about lessons about tech is tech does go through this phase where you introduce some technology that is, I'll call it pre-chasm, to use there's one methodology people talk about in tech called crossing the chasm is sort of a term, but you see technology introduced that is used by early adopters, and everyone gets very excited and says, oh, it's going to take over the world. And then, sometimes people, while the technology is growing, people get disillusioned in year 2 or 3 because it's growing, but it hasn't taken over the world entirely yet. And the danger is sometimes you lose interest, and then what happens in 2 years after that is it does take over the world. And if you look at even Microsoft's history, where we were with Windows Mobile and our smartphone business in 2002 or 2003, that was what happened. And similarly, even the tablet computing, we introduced the first Windows tablet computer, I think in 2001 or 2002. And it was the right trend, but it took a couple of years before, the smartphone and the tablet became everywhere. And, and in that case, Microsoft made a mistake around pulling back too early or not investing enough too early because the trend wasn't happening as fast as we thought. And I think in my mind, when I look at HoloLens, which works for me, I get very excited because I see the big trend happening. And our big focus is going to be on, with HoloLens, how do we keep improving the technology? We'll get more and more people using it. And then I definitely expect, probably, my guess is in 2022, that you will start to see very broad usages of mixed reality and augmented reality. And I do think my goal at Microsoft is to make sure that we are in the right place at that time. And I think the team's doing some really great work there. And I think we will be.
Okay, awesome. So we just got a few seconds left. I got one burning rapid fire question I gotta get out. So this comes from Topper, and we combined 2 questions from Topper and Alan. So do you have any personal projects going on? Like, can we do a PR for you live? And the other follow-up to that, when are you going to write the next version of Nerd Dinner? Is there a Nerd Dinner socially distanced edition coming?
Yeah, and it's a good question. In terms of personal projects going on right now, I have a couple projects that I'm working on. One is I'm trying to use the Office PowerPoint extensibility model to build some plugins inside PowerPoint just for some personal use cases. And so that's actually been kind of a side project of mine that I'm using inside Visual Studio and .NET and learning how to do that. So that's one side project. I haven't published the code yet because I'm mostly kind of hacking my way around trying to learn how to make everything work. So I'm not quite sure I'm ready, quite proud yet to share my code there, but maybe at some point I will. And then the next version of Nerd Dinner, for people that don't know, I wrote a book. It's probably in 2008.
2008. Yep.
2008, 2009. I can't remember when it came out. It's maybe January 2009. And so called ASP.NET MVC, and I wrote with Scott Hanselman and Phil Hack and several others, Rob Connery, this Nerd Dinner project that was a good sample app. I'll say writing a book, that is hard. That sounds deceptively easy, and it's 10 times harder than you think. So I don't right now have any plans to write another book because having gone through it once, I realized, gosh, that is really tough. But maybe someday I will. I don't know. Not this year. That much I know for sure. But I think Nerd Dinner is still alive. I actually haven't. I need to go check it out.
There's a GitHub repo for it. Yep.
I'm sure there's a GitHub repo for it, and it was a good sample at the time. And I should go. I think I have the book on my bookshelf. I should go read it tonight and relive old memories there. But hopefully, a lot of people watching it found the book useful and are using ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web API and all the things that came out of it. And really appreciate you using it, and really appreciate you watching this Q&A, and hope to get a chance to talk to you again soon.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoy the rest of Build, and stick around for the Power Platform Key segment coming up next.
Thanks, Labrina. Thanks, everyone.